We continue with the story of Jephthah, Judges 10 through 12, which is known for his tragic vow. Jephthah was a Gideonite warrior, son of a prostitute. He was driven from his home by his brothers, but then they called him back to fight against the Ammonites. He was a good fighter. And he delivered Israel from the Ammonite enemy. Sent a letter to the king of Ammon. That being of no avail, he defeated them militarily in chapter 11 of the book of Judges. You can see where Ammon is. The Ammonites lived east of the Jordan River. Here you see the Jordan River. He was from Gilead, and the Ammonites were here. The key point of Jephthah's life is when he makes a tragic vow. Jephthah made a vow to the Lord, if you give the Ammonites into my hands, whatever comes out of the door of my house, to meet me when I return in triumph from the Ammonites, I will be the Lord's, and I will sacrifice it as a burnt offering. And it turns out that when he was victorious, what came to meet him from his house was his own daughter. Now you might have asked, what did he expect to come out of his house? Well, there wasn't a large distinction in those days sometimes between one's house and one's stable. So it could have been some sort of livestock that he expected to come out of the house. But it happens to be his daughter, and he was a man of integrity in terms of his vows. He had promised to the Lord that he would offer up whatever happened, whatever came out to greet him as a burnt offering. And so he let his daughter go out into to mourn for 2 months. And then it says that her father did to her as he had vowed. Now some try to explain this away by saying, well, maybe he dedicated her to a temple or something like that. But it seems to probably mean, what at face value it seems to mean, that he offered her up as a burnt offering. In other words, he was influenced by Canaanite teaching in this regard. Now, later on, Jephthah blames the Ephraimites for not joining him in fighting against the Ammonites. And they end up having a war between Ephraim and the other tribes. In the war, you could tell who the Ephraimites were by how they talked. There were regional dialects. And when they approached someone and they wondered who he was, they'd make him say the word shibboleth. And if he pronounced it correctly, then they knew he was an ally. But if he pronounced it the wrong way, maybe something like shibboleth instead of shibboleth, well, then they knew he was the enemy. And the text says that there were some 42,000 killed. This is probably hyperbolic, since in the book of Numbers, Ephraim only had a population of 40,500. And later on in Numbers 26, it drops down to 32,500. But nonetheless, it meant that there were a large number of them who were killed. Then we come to the story of Samson, a man who was strong but who lacked self-control. The angel of the Lord appeared to Samson's parents in Judges chapter 13. The birth was announced to his father, Manoah, whose wife was barren. And the angel of the Lord told that Samson would be a Nazirite from birth. We talked about the Nazirite vow in Numbers chapter 6. The angel of the Lord then disappeared in the flames of the burnt offering. Samson grew up to be a man of great strength and heroic acts. He killed a lion with his bare hands at one point. He burned Philistine fields with fire that was spread by putting fire on the tails of foxes. He killed 1,000 Philistines with a jawbone, it says. And he pulled down the temple of Dagon in the event that ended his life, pulled it down on his own head, but killed more Philistines in his death than he had killed in his life, it says. But Samson is a very flawed character. He's full of self-indulgence. Sometimes he acts like an overgrown juvenile delinquent. He violated his Nazirite vow. He certainly violated it by touching the dead. He also violated it perhaps by drinking wine at his wedding feast. The word for feast in Hebrew, mishteh, means a place of drinking, though he may or may not have actually drunk. But the one thing that he kept most seriously about his Nazirite vow was he avoided cutting his hair. A woman by the name of Delilah takes care of that for him. Talking about women, Samson was unable to control his sexual appetite. He insisted on having a Philistine wife against his parents' wishes. He goes to Gaza, where he lifts up the city gate and carries it up into the hills. But he was there after spending a night in the arms of a prostitute, it says. And then there was Delilah, another foreign woman, whose affair with her led to Samson's downfall. When she finally figures out that the secret of his strength has to do with his Nazirite vow and not cutting his hair, she cut it while he was asleep, and God took away his supernatural strength. So you have the failure to drive out the Canaanites in the early chapters. You have cycles of oppression and the rising up of various judges through chapter 16. The last part of the book will talk about tribal disunity during the time of Judges, chapters 17 through 21. Begins with the story of a man by the name of Micah. Micah worshiped the Lord, but in an idolatrous way. His mother gave him some money, saying, "I solemnly consecrate my silver to the Lord for my son to make a carved image and a cast idol." So misdirected piety there, violating the second commandment, making an image of Yahweh. So this is a violation, not of the first commandment, no other gods, but a violation of the second, to make images of even of the true God. Well, a Levite passes by. Micah hires him to keep the shrine. And then it makes the comment, in those days Israel had no king. Now this is a comment on the free-for-all activity that was going on during the days of the judges. Good kings would suppress false worship. Good kings like Asa and Jehoshaphat, Hezekiah and Josiah. But there was no king to stop Micah from doing what he was doing. Well, it turns out that the Danites had had some trouble occupying their own land down in Philistine territory, and so they decide to travel up north to establish some more territory in the northern part of Israel at Dan. They go to a city called Laish, a quiet and unsuspecting city, and they conquer it and rename it after their tribe, Dan. Well, the Danites hire Micah's greedy, idolatrous Levite. They steal Micah's idols. Micah protests, but to no avail. And so the story is basically saying that this priest then brings idolatry to Dan, and Dan will be known for, later on there will be a shrine that has a golden calf in Dan during the time of Jeroboam I. This is the origin of Dan's idolatry and of the northern kingdom's idolatry. Chapters 19 through 21 describes a civil war that breaks out during that time. And it's another illustration of that motto of the book, there was no king in Israel, everyone did what was right in his own eyes. You have the story of a Levite whose concubine had run away from home, fled from Ephraim to her home where her father lived in Judah. The Levite passed through the territory of Benjamin south to the territory of Judah to fetch his wife. Concubine, by the way, was a slave wife. While he was in Judah, her father received him royally, gave him every kind of courtesy and hospitality. But on the route coming back home through Benjaminite territory, a terrible thing happened. And they were in Judah. He's passing from Judah through Benjamin territory on the way to Ephraim. What you have in Benjaminite territory is kind of a replay of the Sodom and Gomorrah narrative of Genesis 19, where the concubine ends up being raped and murdered in Gibeah by the Benjaminites. Like Sodom, the Levite received no hospitality at the gate. An old Ephraimite man, like Lot, warns him not to spend the night in this place. A mob of Benjaminites demand that the Levite come out so that they can homosexually rape him. He doesn't show much chivalry. He offers the concubine and the old man's daughter instead. And so they rape and abuse the girl all night. He comes out in the morning to find her lifeless corpse on the doorstep. And this causes a civil war against the Benjaminites. Outraged, the Levite cuts the concubine's body into pieces and sends a part to each of the 12 tribes of Israel. This leads to moral outrage and a civil war against Benjamin for failing to redress this atrocity. Benjamin as a tribe, as a result of all this, was nearly annihilated. And after they nearly annihilate the tribe of Benjamin, the other tribes start to worry about whether this tribe would even survive. So they attack the city of Jabesh Gilead, slaughter its innocent population in order to take 400 virgins and stole them, kidnapped them basically, to serve as wives for the remnant of the Benjaminites so that they could build up their population. They also produce a bizarre legal fiction. Now, they had sworn an oath that they would not give any of their daughters to a Benjaminite as a wife. But then they had second thoughts about that, but they couldn't violate their vows. So what they did was they allowed Benjaminites to steal their girls to be their wives, and they wouldn't follow up on it if that happened. And that leads to the conclusion of the book. In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. We will continue this discussion in the last of the videos on Judges.